Okay, it started. So, you're on mute, Tom.
Sorry about that. Good evening to you all. Happy New Year, even though it is the 29th of January. Looking back through my records, I see that Professor Machin is no stranger to our Institute section. He gave us a talk, Innovations in High Temperature Measurement, on the 25th of January 2012. Also, Essential Measurement on the 28th of May 2014. And another talk, Temperature Scales, Past, Present and Future, on the 16th of March 2016. So thank you, Graham, and welcome back.
Pleasure.
Tonight's talk,
I've done that many.
Tonight's talk is about Lord Kelvin, William Thomson, who was arguably the greatest scientist of the 19th century. However, today he is little known outside of the field of temperature measurement, and Professor Machin's talk tonight is to enlighten us. So can I please ask you all to turn off your cameras and go on mute? And Professor Machin, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, hopefully that you are enlightened by the time I've finished. I'm sure you'll tell me if you're not. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this talk. I'm going to speak tonight about Lord Kelvin, who I don't think arguably was the greatest scientist of the 19th century. You know, I'm sure he was the greatest scientist of the 19th century, and hopefully by the end of my talk, you'll agree with me. So after Lord Kelvin died, there were monuments put up around the United Kingdom in his honour. Here's one of them in the Botanic Gardens in Belfast that was commissioned in 1913. I've got these wonderful photographs of being commissioned in the pouring rain. It never rains in Belfast, but apparently it was on that day. But anyway, and it's a wonderful thing. I've actually been to see the monument there as well. So let's see. In my talk today, I'm going to really do a walk through his life. It's always nice to hear people's life stories, isn't it? So I'm going to do a walk through his life, first of all, and then I'm going to speak about some of his more significant activities that he did during his life as well. And hopefully, as we think about those things, it'll really show how the influence that Lord Kelvin had in the 19th century reaches out into the 20th century, into the 21st century, and will even reach out beyond beyond our lives as well. And I'll end with a few fun things about Lord Kelvin as well. So let's say a few words about his early life. So Lord Kelvin, he was born William Thomson in very rural Belfast. Here's a nice picture of Belfast. You can see it, little place nestled between the two rivers there before it started industrialising. He was born in rural Belfast in 1824, so just over 200 years ago. His father was a very remarkable person. His father was a farm labourer, really a farm worker, but very driven and a self-made man. And he eventually became chair of mathematics in Glasgow University. That's quite an amazing social change for them, which was quite difficult in those times. And not only was he renowned for his mathematical ability, he also wrote lots of textbooks which were used well after his death and seen as exemplars in his field. So that's Lord Kelvin's father. When he was made Professor of Mathematics, they moved to Glasgow. Glasgow was already not a rural city. It was really a major city of the British Empire at the time, one of the biggest in Britain, and it was undergoing rapid industrialization. It was a busy, dirty, noisy place. And the Thomson brothers, William and his older brother James, they went to their first natural philosophy, which is code for physics these days. Their first natural philosophy classes at the age of 10. That's when William Thomson went there. Okay, so that's an amazingly young age, even those days. And what was even more annoying for probably the other students was that the Thomsons, between them, won the academic prizes in the classes for mathematics, for astronomy, for natural philosophy, and others as well, even when they were only the ages 10, 11, and 12. So they were very, very bright individuals. I think if James hadn't had William as his brother, he would have been recognised as a genius in his own right. But I think he was a bit overshadowed by having William as his younger brother, but nevertheless overshadowing him. So that was his start to academic career in Glasgow. Oops. But when he got to the age of 15, he was still at Glasgow at the time. The education at Glasgow was very classical. They still read Newton's Principia in Latin, of course. They read the Laplace's Celestial Mechanics as well. So that was all very classical. But there was a new mathematics, new theories being developed in Europe. And Thomson got hold of this book, which was published in 1839, which is basically the Fourier's analytic theory of heat. It was in French, but that was no problem. He read it in French, 550 pages. He read it in 2 weeks, apparently. And what he said was, I have become filled with the utmost admiration and the splendor and poetry of Fourier. I took Fourier out of the library, university library, and in a fortnight I have mastered it, gone right through it. Now, as engineers, I'm sure you're familiar with Fourier transforms, but I must say I struggled a bit with Fourier transforms when I was at university. But anyway, he didn't seem to have any problems at the age of 15. I also found it interesting. He calls it poetry, right? So this is an extract from Fourier's book. This is what poetry is, according to Thomson. Doesn't look like poetry to me, but that's what he thought it was. It was a very mathematical treatment of heat, analytic theory of heat. But the theories that are in there really shaped some of Thomson's thinking all throughout his life. And he used some of those theories applied to many different physical problems, not just to the analytic theory of heat, as we'll see later on. Now, interestingly, when Thomson became 16, he read another book by Philip Kelland. He was a renowned professor of mathematics at Edinburgh University, and he published his own theory of heat in 1837. And in that, he makes this statement. He says, there can be little doubt that anyone who carefully examines the subject, that nearly all of Fourier's series in this branch of the subject are erroneous. Well, that's quite a statement. Thomson just completely and utterly disagreed with Kelland, even though Kelland was like in his 30s, the height of his career, academic career. Thomson was still a school, but still really would have been a schoolboy, but he was at university. He strongly disagreed, and he wrote a paper to the Cambridge Mathematical Journal showing how Kelland was wrong in his thinking. That really annoyed Kelland to begin with, because it was sent to Kelland straight away by the editor. But when Thomson's father and William did a bit of smoothing of the writing, Kelland actually accepted Thomson was right, and that he was wrong, and that actually Fourier's treatment of the branch was actually correct. And he actually said that I'm charmed with the paper in the end. So that's quite an amazing admission for someone who was right at the height of their career, with basically someone who's still a boy showing him that he was actually in the wrong. So that really already gives you a flavour of Thomson's brilliance. So when William Thomson was 16 years old, he left Glasgow University. He didn't take a degree, because if you take a degree, you couldn't take another one in those days. He didn't take a degree. He went to Cambridge and studied natural philosophy there. And he's one of those, I don't know, one of those really all-rounders where he could seem to do and excel at everything he did. So he excelled at sports. He bought his own rowing boat and he won races in rowing. He was a co-founder of the Music Society as well at Peterhouse. And he won the Smith's Prize for Advanced Mathematics. That was really the absolute highest ethereal mathematical prize that you could win in Cambridge, as well as writing scientific papers of the highest level during his time there. The examiner of the Smith Prize, some of them said to each other, "You and I are just about fit to mend his pens," because they recognised the genius Thomson at the time. And also one of the papers he published while he was at Cambridge, so he must be between the age of 16 and 20, was this paper called, it's not a very exciting title, but on the uniform motion of heat in homogeneous solid bodies and its connection with the mathematical theory of electricity. It doesn't sound very exciting, but actually James Clerk Maxwell, who was also a pretty eminent scientist, said it contained one of the most valuable science-forming ideas because it was one of the first people to draw parallels between the conduction of heat and the flow of electricity, and showed that you could use parallel equations and methods of images to solve what were then currently insoluble problems. So it made quite a big change and made a big junction of classical physics together, which wasn't made before. So that was a very important paper that was published. So after he graduated at the age of 21 from Cambridge, his father, okay, so this is a bit of politics going on here. The professor of natural philosophy at Glasgow University was ailing, was very ill, and his father wanted William to become the successor of this professor, but Cambridge was renowned for being too theoretical for people in Glasgow. So he thought, oh, you should go and do some practical work with some renowned scientists. So William Thomson went to Paris, became acquainted with a number of leading scientists at the time, one of them being Henri Renaud, who was a professor of natural philosophy at the Collège de France. And he was doing research at the time into the efficiency of steam engines, film properties of gases, and thermometer comparisons as well. All this was very interesting to Thomson, and Thomson assisted Renaud in his work and developed a strong working relationship with him. In fact, a long time later, after Renaud has died, he gave this speech in Paris and said he learned this from Renaud. He learned a love of precision in all things and the highest virtue of an experimenter, patience. And if you've ever done experiments, you know that they're nearly always ready to go when you go home. So that's why you need patience as well. Anyway, after a lot of lobbying, William Thomson became Professor of Natural Philosophy at the age of 22. That's an amazingly young age in 1846. One of the faculty said to William's father, "It's plain from the testimonials that your son is always shortly to be a second Newton," and it proved to be the case as well. And he really set about modernizing the department and really modernizing natural philosophy. Let's see how he did that. So just think back to the 1840s when he was appointed. When you were an academic in the 1840s, your role was not to do research. In fact, very few of them did research. The research was done by wealthy gentlemen in their private laboratories. An academic's job was to teach their subject, and they took on private students to earn more money. They did pay-as-you-go lectures to earn more money, and they wrote textbooks to earn more money as well. Let me switch my email off. People shouldn't be emailing me this time of night, should they? There we go. So William Thomson changed all that. He modernized the style. He set up the first research teaching laboratory, and he co-wrote the first modern textbook, known as the Principia of the 19th century, Thomson and Tate. Let's go through those in turn. So, Tom, if you ever go to the Hunterian Museum in Glasgow, you'll see some of the models that Thomson used to illustrate the physical principles involved. Some of them are very vivid. He wanted to work out the speed of a bullet, so he had a ballistic pendulum. He had a gun. You can see the gun here that he used. He had homemade bullets, which he had some lead and a crimp, and he turned it into a bullet. And he had a powder horn, so he used to fill the muzzle, put the bullet in, kneel, take aim, fire. The pendulum would go up a certain angle, and from those you can work out the velocity of the bullet itself. You can imagine filling out all the health and safety forms that you need to do today to do such an experiment. It probably just wouldn't be worth the effort, but he didn't have to worry about things like that in those days. Not that there's anything wrong with health and safety, of course. Students were also of very varying ability. This is also interesting to know that every student of the university had to take physics. There was no, you couldn't get out of it. And he made no accommodation whatever for them just because they were art students. They still had to listen to him. So here's one of them said, I listened to the lectures on the pendulum for a month, and all I know about the pendulum yet is it wags. It was very challenging stuff for them. And teaching, he very enthusiastic about his research. And I think it's interesting to know he had no syllabus. Can you imagine running a university course today with no syllabus? He had no syllabus of lectures. He used no notes in lecturing, and I think he never used notes in lecturing. And he also considered it unnecessary to teach what could be got from ordinary textbooks. Well, if you've got Laplace, you've got Newton, you don't need to worry about that. You just learn that. I'll just teach you the new stuff. That's quite a hard style for a lot of students, but they seem to love it. And I think one of the reasons why they did was because he was really keen to make sure that his teaching was grounded in physical reality. And so he asked questions like, what does dx by dt mean? And a student said, apparently this really happened in a lecture class. The student said, oh, it means the limiting value of the ratio of the increment of x to the increment of t when the latter increment was indefinitely diminished. Okay. And Thomson said, was rather dismissively, well, that's what a mathematician would say, isn't it? Doesn't anyone know it represents a velocity? And of course, dx by dt represents a velocity. So he's very keen to make sure that although it is mathematically couched, it is actually grounded in physical reality, and that people grasp the physical reality of that as well, which I think was very important. Here's a picture of his natural philosophy laboratory. It's a teaching laboratory. It's a research laboratory. Such a thing just didn't exist in universities until Thomson introduced it, and then they became spread throughout both Britain and elsewhere where Britain had influence. In fact, he was asked to become the professor of natural philosophy at Cambridge quite a number of times, but he refused because he was so happy to be working in Glasgow. And then in 1860, so this is now 15 or 16 years after he became professor, he was playing the noble Scottish sport of curling, and he fell heavily while he was doing that, and he fractured his leg very badly. He had a limp all his life after that, breaking his leg near the top of his leg. Anyway, a friend of his visited him, Peter Guthrie Tate, and they hatched a plan to prepare a natural philosophy textbook. And I think Tate must have wished he'd never raised it with Thomson, because Tate was very driven. He wanted to get it done. Let's take a few months, really. Thomson wanted to include every new finding that he kept finding out in his laboratory, and he kept changing his mind, and he was real, and nearly drove Tate mad. This is just a typical comment. There are lots of them. I get sick of this great book. You only send me scraps, and these at rare intervals. What can I do? Tate was nearly driven mad by Thomson's delays. They were supposed to write 4 volumes of this, but eventually, one volume, a big volume, was published, called The Treatise in Natural Philosophy, and this became known as the Principia of the 19th century, after Newton, and it is affectionately referred to as T prime, Thomson and Tate. Now, Thomson and Tate, in their preface, so this is the frontage page of the MPL copy. In their preface, they say our object is to give a tolerably complete account of what is now known as natural philosophy and language adopted to the non-mathematical reader. Imagine that. All of natural philosophy compressed into this book. James Clerk Maxwell said that Thomson and Tate were the 2 northern wizards have brought together and made plain the findings of modern physics. Made plain. Well, maybe some thought it was made plain. Students struggled with it. They say, known in my year as the student's first glimpse of Hades, because it was maybe more difficult than the likes of James Clerk Maxwell thought. Now, remember what he said? A non-mathematical reader. So this is adopted for the non-mathematical reader. You just need to turn to any random page in the volumes, and you find these non-mathematical treatments of natural philosophy? Well, maybe in Victorian times, they had a different view of what non-mathematical meant compared to today. Anyway, Thomson, he held the chair of natural philosophy until 1899. He celebrated his jubilee in 1896, 50th year, 550 years as professor. And he gave this after dinner speech. And in this after dinner speech, he actually said he was a failure, which people were shocked he'd call it. And what he meant was he'd failed to bring all known physics at that time into one unified classical natural philosophy theory. So if you think about it, Einstein was a failure as well, because he always wanted to bring understand quantum mechanics. He also wanted to unite gravitation and quantum mechanics. And of course, he never did that in his lifetime. So Einstein was a failure as well, just like Kelvin was a failure as well. Of course, he wasn't a failure. He just failed in the aim that he had. He transformed the teaching of natural philosophy. He introduced a teaching laboratory, which is adopted everywhere. He wrote the first modern physics textbook, Thomson and Tate, and he reshaped academic life into one of research. Here's a nice picture. You can just about see him there on his jubilee. This is the really grand, modern, grand new frontage of Glasgow University. It was new at that time, of course. Here he is giving his last lecture. I haven't been able to work out exactly what he's doing or talking about. This looks like friction, doesn't it? Over here in his last lecture as well in Glasgow. As soon as he gave his last lecture and retired from being, I think he was Vice Chancellor or Chancellor of the university, he then enrolled as a student again to keep learning. So that's the measure of the man. So he was knighted in 1866. We'll see why in a few minutes. He was made a peer of the realm in 1892. He was president of the Royal Society, president of the Royal Society of Edinburgh twice, Order of Merit, Privy Councillor. There were massive amounts of honours heaped on him from all over the world. In 1907, his health was declined, and he died in December 1907. Glasgow was basically brought to a standstill when the funeral cortege took in his coffin to the train to bring it down to London. London was basically stationary around Westminster Abbey because of the people that went to the funeral, and there he is interred close to the remains of Isaac Newton. And here's another monument to Thomson. Again, this one is in Westminster Abbey, a stained glass window, and it says Lord Kelvin. It's the Lord Kelvin Memorial window, and it says, "In memory of Baron Kelvin of Largs, engineer, natural philosopher, born 1824, died 1907. Just a few words about his personal life as well. So first of all, his first marriage, he married his second cousin, and sadly his second cousin was very poor in health. Nearly all their married life seemed to be fine when they got married, but almost immediately, in fact on their honeymoon, her health rapidly declined. And they were married for quite a long time, as you can see, but she had very poor health. In fact, he had to carry her around the house to move her from one room to another. He was a very devoted and loving husband. And they went all over Europe and different places to try and find a cure, but she never did, and she died in 1870. He had friends with leading scientists all over Europe and in America as well, and they held him in great esteem and great honor. So Hermann Helmholtz, who we'll come across later, a very famous scientist, a German scientist, he said, "Thomson exceeds all the great men of science with whom I have made personal acquaintance in intelligence and lucidity and mobility of thought, so that I felt quite wooden beside him." That's quite a thing to say when you know that Helmholtz was a great scientist already. When Thomson died, he took up sailing, but he took up sailing big time. So he bought a yacht. He was very rich by this time. You'll see why in a few minutes. He bought a yacht that needed 18 people to sail it, a big yacht. So Graham, this is a bit bigger than yours, to satisfy his love of the sea and adventure. You can see Lord Kelvin here on deck, trying out his depth-sounding invention here. And here's Thomson. This is his wife. What an amazing hat. And his guests on his yacht. So this gives you an idea of the scale of his own personal yacht as well. Yeah, but he didn't stay unmarried. I think he assumed he would stay unmarried after his wife died, but he got married again in unusual circumstances. So in 1873, he was running one of his business enterprises, laying telegraph cables, and he was off Madeira, and the ship and the laying hit problems, and it took him 16 days to deal with these problems. And while he was there, he was invited to the home of Madeira's wealthiest landowner and wine merchant, Charles Blandy. If you go to Funchal today, you can still see the Blandy cellar there. Now, Blandy had a couple of daughters, and these daughters learnt Morse code from him within those 2 weeks that he was there. So both of them were pretty bright. I don't think I could learn Morse code in 2 weeks. Anyway, an attachment developed between him and Francis Anna, Blandy's second daughter. And as he was sailing out with the ship, Francis unfurled this blanket from the villa, which was on the hill, saying, "Goodbye, goodbye, Sir William Thompson." And he noticed that, and I think they must have had some correspondence between the two, even though I haven't found any record of it. Because the next year he sailed to Madeira, and from the harbour he proposed using signalling to Francis Anna in Morse code or some form of code from the yacht, "Will you marry me?" And she signalled back from their villa, "Yes, I will." And so they got married 2 days later. Sorry, just a few days later, in this chapel here, which is the British Consular Chapel in Madeira, in Funchal. This is my photograph. I went there last year and saw some of those things while I was there. You can go to the records and you can see the record of marriage, William Thompson and Francis Anna Blandy, who was a native of Madeira. They were both by this time, they were both very wealthy. She was an heiress. He was very wealthy because of business interests. So instead of living in that small, cramped university apartments, he decided to build a castle. Well, why not? And he built this baronial castle in Largs in Ayrshire, and it's still there as well. It's very extensive grounds. It still exists today. I noticed actually there was an apartment for sale in this castle only a few months ago for £140,000. So if you want a holiday retreat, that's one there on the coast there. I've not been there yet, but it's on my list to go and see that castle. Here's some pictures. Kelvin in the grounds. There's Kelvin and Helmholtz. Kelvin, Helmholtz's wife, and there's Francis Anna as well. I think that's right. Hopefully I haven't got the wives mixed up. He was a bit eccentric at times. Well, I suppose scientists sometimes aren't they? And one of them was he always carried green notebooks around. I love this picture from the Royal Society. He's got his green notebook clutched in his hands here. And he used to pull it out at any time things occurred to him and start writing and calculating. Again, Helmholtz said he carried around his mathematical notebook with him always and would begin to calculate in the midst of company. This was treated with awe by the party. He did that. People tolerated it as an eccentricity. His second wife wasn't so enamored by him doing it. And she used to generally kick her husband's shins under the table if he seemed to be about to reach in his pocket for a green notebook. Well, that was probably quite helpful for him. There's also an occasion when Queen Victoria gave a speech and said something that wasn't quite right about nautical things. And Francis Anna could see that Kelvin was going to stand up and put Queen Victoria right. I think he got more than a gentle kick in the shins at that point, so that he didn't put Queen Victoria right in the end. So here she is. She's quite a formidable lady, isn't she? This is a lovely picture that's in the Hunterian Museum archive. And here's a nice photograph of Lord and Lady Kelvin in their home at Netherall. So that's really the personal life. I want to talk about some of his scientific achievements now. So I want to talk about thermodynamics in 1840s, transatlantic cables in 1850s, the fact he became very, very rich and instantly recognizable in the 1860s as well, had great businesses, and his desire to see measurement done correctly and establishing the NPL in the 1880s. So quite a lot and full life. Let's talk about some of these things. So understanding temperature. So the French natural philosophers, Fourier, Renan, Carnot, Amonton, they were streets ahead really in understanding thermal properties and temperature. They didn't really understand the fundamentals of temperature, but they had a lot of mathematics behind and underlying it. There were some findings of James Joule, which I'll talk about. And then there was a puzzling diversity of temperature scales, which I'll show you in a few moments. And Kelvin, as it were, or sorry, Thomson at the time, stood on the shoulders of these giants and got an insight of how to bring all those things together and join up the dots, and so invented thermodynamic temperature. Here's Renault's magnum opus. So all that work that Renault did on the efficiency of steam engines, the properties of gases, became background information for Kelvin to use. Here's the MPL copy of the book, and here's an extract of the property of gases, which may have been used by Kelvin. Here's Carnot. He wrote one small book, Reflections on the Motive Power of Fire. It was very difficult to get hold of. It was an obscure small book, but it was the first description of the maximum possible efficiency of heat engines. And when Thomson eventually got a copy in 1848, he said it was an epoch-making gift to science because it helped him really draw together how temperature and pressure and volume all worked in a fundamental way. Here's a nice picture which some of you might see. If you can remember back to my talk of temperature scales a long time ago, I think I might have shown this picture. There were many, many temperature scales in use at the time. Here's a thermometer with 18 scales from the University Museum in Utrecht. And this is how to compare them. So that's an interesting one. So why are there all these scales? Surely there must be something more fundamental than just all these random scales with arbitrary calibrations. And then there's the work of James Joule. James Joule showed that mechanical work could be converted into an equivalent amount of heat through measuring temperature rises in water as paddles moved the water. Now, this was a bit strange, and the scientific establishment didn't accept Joule's findings. Actually, they thought he was wrong. What's this? He thought he was just an upstart. Anyway, Joule persisted. In 1847 in Oxford, he came to this meeting of the British Association of Science to report some new results. But the meeting was running short of time, so the president said, "Come on, be quick, just give us a summary of what you're saying." And so he did, and that would have been the end of it. But Thomson, on hearing what Joule said, stood up in the meeting and said, "This work is of very great interest." And at this point, people started to take notice because Thomson was already the foremost scientific authority of his age, and they started to take notice. And it led to a collaboration between Joule and Thomson, and it led to the emergence of the fundamental principle of the conservation of energy, that heat could be converted into work, that work could be converted into heat, but energy is not lost. Useful energy is lost through entropy, but energy is not lost. And here's a wonderful picture from the Royal Society archives of a paper handwritten by Thomson, a key manuscript where he really reports on the idea for the first time on the conservation of energy. So he had nice handwriting, didn't he? Much better than mine. So in the first half of the 1850s, Thomson drew all these ideas together. He developed a successful theoretical framework for absolute thermometry based on a version of Carnot's heat engine. And the key ideas that he brought together were that a true absolute scale that is fundamental, independent of substance, did exist, that there was an absolute zero when atomic motion stopped. He accepted that heat was atomic motion or molecular motion. He accepted that energy was conserved, that heat and mechanical work were interconvertible, even if not with 100% efficiency. And those conclusions that Thomson made still form the basis of primary thermometry today. If you want more details, there's a wonderful book called by Hasuk Chang called Inventing Temperature, and chapter 4 goes into a lot of details of that. I haven't got time to go into details today, but you know, at MPL, and other national measurement institutes around the world. We're still using the same ideas on the foundation that Thomson developed all those years ago. And we're changing at the moment how temperature traceability is done. As an engineers, you'll all know that temperature traceability is done through an unbroken chain of measurements. So you do a calibration in a National Measurement Institute. The calibrated thermometer goes to a calibration lab. The calibration lab then does the calibration of a user thermometer. The user then uses the thermometer in their process. And that process thermometer is traceable back to the national standard. What we're doing here is we're working to try and develop devices which you can then use in process, but give you link directly to the Kelvin. For instance, here's one on Doppler broadening, where you basically measure the changing width of a spectral line, and from that you can determine the temperature of the gas. And if you make that little cell of gas into the thermometer, you can then use the fundamental physics to determine the temperature of that gas, and therefore the temperature of that process. And because it relies on fundamental physics, it doesn't change. So you basically get a temperature sensor that gives you the right answer for the duration of the process, be that 10 years or 100 years. So that's what we're working on, some of the things we're working on at the moment at MPL, but based on the foundation established by Thomson. Okay, so laying a transatlantic cable. So Thomson became one of the first global tech tycoons. Imagine a world without instant communication. Imagine a world where it takes weeks to get a message from the US to Europe. Imagine that. Well, there was a company set up in 1856, the Atlantic Telegraph Company, and they had the absolutely audacious aim of linking the British Isles, Ireland was part of the British Isles in those days, and Newfoundland using a copper cable of over 3,000 kilometers in length. No one had made a cable that length before. It was the moonshot project of the day. Just really gripped the public imagination. It really did. Thomson started just as a passive director, but he's got more and more involved in the project. The previous technical director of the company basically got his physics wrong and was ultimately sacked because he damaged one of the cables. And Thomson assumed that role. And there were a number of failed attempts, and the company was nearly wound up. But Thomson was very persistent, and he insisted there's nothing wrong with the fundamental science. It can work. It will work. And he was so persuasive that they continued. They loaned, or they commissioned Isambard Kingdom Brunel's steamship, the Great Eastern, to lay the cable. The first time it failed, but the second time it worked, and they actually got communication from the US to that part in Ireland for the first time, and that really showed that you could use very long distance telegraph cables. And in fact, it was thought that the telegraph cable paid for itself almost immediately, because although it probably cost many hundreds of millions of pounds in today's money, maybe even billions, but certainly large amounts of money in today's money, because the Indian Mutiny happened, and the British Army, which had a big station in Canada, was going to send a load of soldiers to India to suppress the Indian Mutiny, but it had already been suppressed. So if they hadn't had the cable, those sailors would have gone, even though they weren't needed. And so a telegraph cable was sent saying, don't send soldiers, it's over. And that obviously saved huge amounts of money and expense. Thomson really did the key things to make it work. He developed the physics behind the cable, sending the cable. He showed that you had to use copper of a particular purity to make it work. He developed the installation of the cable to make sure it could go under seas without being ruined. He developed the cable design that would work. He invented the mechanism for laying the cable. He developed the apparatus for measuring the signals. And he went on to invent, patent, and sell many of the instruments associated with telegraphic communication around the world. And that's one of the sources of his wealth. You can see here a cable galvanometer, a mouse mill motors. This is for automatic measurement of the telegraph cables. This is for putting the ink on the tape as the signal goes through. Here's a section of the cable itself. The Times was ecstatic. He said, "This is the most wonderful achievement of our victorious century." The Queen Victoria knighted Thomson, Sir William Thomson he became, and really global communications started at that point, and telegraph cables very rapidly crisscrossed the world. And of course, Britain was at the forefront at that time because it needed to keep in contact with all the outposts of the empire. And so you could all of a sudden communicate between London and Delhi instantaneously because of the work that Thomson had done. He became not only very rich because of it, he became a global celebrity. People recognized him in the street, which is very unusual, but people recognized him in the street. And, you know, he was a bit like the Elon Musk of the 19th century, but maybe with different politics. I don't know, but maybe different in that way. But he was certainly recognizable, famous, and wealthy. But he didn't stop there. Not only did he have telegraph cable companies, he also developed navigation aids for iron ships, tide predictors, depth gauges, general scientific instruments, which were mainly made by James White in Glasgow. Here's a picture of Thomson, quite a famous picture of Thomson with a Royal Navy. This became the Royal Navy issue compass on all the Royal Navy ships, and there were a lot of Royal Navy ships. At the time of the Empire, the Royal Navy philosophy was to have a navy that was big enough to fight two major wars with two different enemies and still be victorious at the same time. So they had a lot of ships at the time. Using a compass on an iron ship was difficult, but Kelvin invented a way of actually correcting for the effect of the iron on the ship. And there's a story, I'm not sure how apocryphal it is, but Kelvin invented this compass. Here's the bowl of the compass, and he took it to the Navy in London, and he showed it to them. And one of the Navy officers said, "Oh, it'll never work. It's much too flimsy and fragile to work in the difficult conditions on a Navy ship." So apparently Thomson took it and threw it across the room, picked it up, and it was working. He then took a standard issue Navy compass, threw it across the room, and it was broken. And he won the contract. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's quite a nice story, isn't it, about how he did it. So that's his businesses. So that's how he became very wealthy. He was also very passionate about precise measurement, about the metric system, and about the need for a National Measurement Institute. So many of you will probably know the Kelvin dictum, which is this: when you can measure what you're speaking about and express it in numbers, you know something about it. But when you cannot measure it, when you cannot express it in numbers, your knowledge is of a meagre and unsatisfactory kind. You have scarcely advanced to the stage of science. And you have to remember here that Thomson at this time was embroiled in heated debates about the age of the Earth and the age of the sun, and with geologists, and it's very the part of the issue they had was they didn't really have numbers. They just had speculation that the Earth was very old or maybe infinitely old. And that wasn't good enough for Kelvin. Where's your numbers? Where's your proof? Where's your proof? In fact, interestingly, Kelvin was showed from the second law of thermodynamics that you can't actually have an infinitely old universe, because with the second law of thermodynamics, entropy always increases in a closed system. The universe is effectively a closed system. So eventually the universe will be a uniform temperature and no useful work will be done. We're not at that stage yet. And so the universe can't be of infinite age. So that was quite an interesting development, interesting idea, and the heat death of the universe as it's commonly known today. He also really hated the imperial system. He was giving this lecture in the United States, but you could find this scattered, sort of same thing scattered throughout all of Kelvin's writings, particularly later on in his life. He said, "You are in this country are subject to the British insularity in weights and measures. I hope the teaching of the metrical system will not be let slip in the American schools. I look upon our English system of units as a wickedly brain-destroying piece of bondage under which we suffer." He really thought the metric system was far superior to imperial, and of course so do I. Called just by way of background, of course, the metric system was created in 1791 during the French Revolution. Began with mass and with length. That's an interesting story in itself. Metric went global in 1875 with the meter convention, when it was signed by a number of countries, including Great Britain in 1884. Not so, but we're slowly getting there in metrication. And today, nearly every country around the world, either formally or informally, uses the metric system. And this year is its 150th anniversary of the signing of the meter convention in May. I should say this year, not next year, shouldn't it? So I'm going to a celebration in Versailles in May to mark the signing of the meter convention. Just by way of background, this is the metric system as we have it today. There's the units and the quantities. The quantities are the invariant things. Units you can use. These are the SI units. Of course, you can use other units to measure things in, but it wouldn't be SI. I don't want to go into details in that today. Kelvin, when he was elevated to the House of Lords, when he became Lord Kelvin, he was really a dauntless campaigner for the metric system. And he spoke, here's a Hansard record. He said that the metric system be at once legalized for all purposes, and after 2 years be rendered compulsory by Act of Parliament, and that the metric system be taught in all public schools. He was dauntless in his promotion of the metric system, but he didn't get it through the system, did he? The white paper was written. The bill for compulsory metrification was nearly there, but then other things got in the way. Not least the First World War. And it was not until the 1970s did Britain become metric. I'm sure Kelvin would not have been very happy with how long it all took. But with establishing an MPL, he was entirely more successful, although he wasn't the main driver, he was influential. Helmholtz, we've seen Helmholtz a number of times before. Helmholtz was the first director of the German version of MPL, the PTB, the Physikalische Technische Werkstatt, and in Berlin. I've been there. I've been there lots of times actually, and the original building that the PTR was established in is still standing, and it still has the shrapnel marks from World War II on the wall as well. In 1896, Kelvin and others worthies of the scientific establishment petitioned the UK government to set up NPL, and in this they were more successful. It was established in 1900. Queen Victoria granted this lovely country house. Maybe some of you have been in it. Bushy House, which is still there on the MPL site, for use as the MPL under direction of the Royal Society. Of course, we're much bigger than that building now, but that's where it all started. On the 19th of March, the Prince of Wales opened NPL, and he said that the object of this scheme is, I understand that's opening NPL, to bring scientific knowledge to bear practically upon everyday industrial and commercial life, to break down the barrier between theory and practice, to effect a union between science and commerce, which is what NPL's main role is still today. Lord Kelvin, you can just about see him, make him out in this picture, this great Victorian character here. Lord Kelvin, he was given the job of seconding the vote of thanks to the Prince of Wales, and he commented the scientific importance of exceedingly minute and accurate measurements, which though they may not strike the popular imagination, were the foundation of the most brilliant discoveries, and that's still the case today. And NPL, it's NPL's anniversary this year actually now, and we're still fulfilling that core mission. So it seems that Lord Kelvin was right. The UK did need a National Measurement Institute. But Lord Kelvin was also right, it seems. Anyway, let's say, if I'm coming to the end of my talk, just a few words about some trivia really. So Lord Kelvin actually appears in a number of fiction books, which is quite interesting. He was so famous. Here's one. There's an unauthorized sequel to The War of the Worlds, written by this man, Garrett Service. And in it, Thomas Edison, joined by Lord Kelvin and others, to go to Mars to attack the Martians before they return. Edison and co, of course, win the battle, and the Martians don't trouble Earth again. Now you know why the Martians don't trouble Earth again. because they won that battle. It's a very interesting read, but not great literature, I can tell you. But it has some interesting ideas about space travel even before flight had taken place. So that's some interesting ideas there. And a more interesting read is this more recent book in 1992. It's what's known as a steampunk novel. That's a genre I had to ask my wife about. It's a mixing of modern scientific ideas and Victorian life, and so it's as if Victorian life hasn't changed, but modern science has gone with it. So there's still steam-powered things, there's still horses and carriages, but there's also amazing things like Lord Kelvin's machine, which nearly saves the world from a meteor strike. You have to read the book to find out why it doesn't. It definitely saves the heroine of the book through time travel. So I hope I haven't spoiled it for you, but it's a very good read. I enjoyed it a lot, particularly the rather dark Gothic aspects to it. But it's a very interesting. There's also another book called City of Lights, which is also it features Lord Kelvin. But Lord Kelvin in that book is actually the evil chair of a Chicago electric company who wants to divert all the water from the Niagara Falls to generate electricity from Chicago. So he appears in quite a number of literature books. Anyway, the other thing is I found the only known recording of Lord Kelvin's voice. So I hope you can hear this. We were having trouble with it earlier in the day, before the talk started, and he's talking about electrons. So let's hear him. I won't play the whole lot. Well, there you go. So now you know what he sounded like. That was in the year of his death. So I come to the end of my talk, really. When Newton had written Principia, he said, if I'd seen further, it's because I was standing on the shoulders of giants. Now, Lord Kelvin had massive world-changing achievements as a scientist, as an engineer, as a statesman as well. But all those things are largely forgotten today. He's named, yes, after the temperature unit, but who know about many other things that he did in reinventing science, research, writing modern textbooks, becoming a tech tycoon, kickstarting global telecommunications revolution, which we're still experiencing today. Why is he forgotten today? Well, I think it's because he lived, didn't he, on the cusp between classical physics and modern physics, quantum mechanics and general relativity and so forth. Although he did foresee both relativity and quantum mechanics, he didn't really live to see them fleshed out. So the scientist we remember today is not Kelvin, is it? But it's Einstein. And, I ran into Einstein when I was on holiday last year in Bern in Switzerland, and I thought I'd ask him a question. So I'd asked him a question, Albert, tell me, whose shoulders did you stand on? Because I'm sure he must have stood on Kelvin's shoulders to see further. I know he was very quiet. I didn't really get a word out of him, though he did whisper in my ear something about which would have pleased Kelvin. He said that classical thermodynamics is the only physical theory of universal content which I'm convinced will never be overthrown. Well, I'm sure that's correct. So I won't disagree with Einstein on that. So here we have a great life. If I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. Lord Kelvin did much to shape the modern world in which we live today, and the influence that he had endures now and endures into the future as well. I just wonder how he fitted everything in to one life. I only really have given you a snippet, a flavour of some of the things that he did. How did he fit it in to one life? I don't know. I really think it's about time Lord Kelvin appeared on the BBC programme Great Lice, don't you? And that's really come to the end of my talk. Here's the last monument, the Lord Kelvin Memorial Monument in Glasgow. I took this picture in the summer of last year. And I love this little statement, which you can remind your PhD students with, that when you're face to face with a difficulty, you're up against a discovery. Lord Kelvin. a great life. Thank you very much for listening.
That was excellent, Graham. Thank you.
I'm happy to take any questions if anyone's got any.
This is Howard Chetwin. Hello.
Hello, Howard.
Brilliant talk. I really enjoyed it. That's fantastic. Exactly how did William Thomson get called Lord Kelvin? Where did Kelvin come in? I know he worked with that range of temperature, but at what point did that come into him?
Okay, so when he became when he was made Baron, he basically took the name Kelvin from the river that goes through Glasgow at Kelvin Grove. So it's the River Kelvin. That's where he gets the name from.
Okay.
It was being used for temperature before his death, though. So I've seen some papers from that time where it talks about absolute temperature in Kelvin.
All right, thank you very much.
Can I see the slide 40 again? I blinked and it went away. It was
Slide
very
40.
quick.
Slide 40. Yeah,
Thank
I'll
you.
have to go back. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
Wow. What's on 40? Oh yeah, Magnum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. From Regno. Okay, thank you.
I think you can get the book on Amazon.
It's massive, and it's 2 volumes. I mean, it's really massive.
It's pure poetry.
It's pure poetry. But it's French. It's bound to be poetry. Everything reads better in French.
Any other questions? That was a pretty comprehensive talk, Graham, really. It was
Thank you.
amazing.
Well, I was very fortunate. My someone in the communications department at MPL said to me at the end of 2023, "Oh, it's Lord Kelvin's anniversary next year. Oh, you're in Thames. You must know something about it. Why don't you write a talk about him?" Oh, I wish I'd never said yes.
I'm glad you did.
Well, they did. To give them their credit, they actually gave me a budget, so I could actually go and do some research up in Glasgow, and went to the Hunterian and went into their archive, and read a lot of books as well. So it was good that they gave me that time.
And is it right that you seem to say that Carnot really only did that one thing? But I mean, that was quite an impressive thing.
Yeah. He was a military officer. And he wrote this short treatise on reflections of the motive power of fire, and he was the first one to describe the Carnot cycle. And although the science behind the Carnot cycle, as he envisaged it, wasn't quite right, because he envisaged the flow of this mysterious substance called caloric, which all the scientists at the age believed in, because like a water wheel. A water wheel goes round, water flows through, but it doesn't become transformed. So they thought this caloric was was the way that heat didn't get transformed either. It just flowed through a system like water through a water wheel. And it was only when conservation of energy and the concept of lost energy through entropy came about did it realize that caloric doesn't really exist and heat's molecular motion.
Yeah. Okay, over to you, Tom, I think.
We've got a very, very quiet audience tonight. Yeah, it was absolutely fascinating. Now, I sat down and I listened to it, and I was able to understand a huge amount of it. Now that is really good, and it was very, very interesting. And I didn't even know he was Irish. That's a plus.
Yeah.
But no, for some reason I had him down as Scottish. But anyway, there you go. Graham, it's been a wonderful talk as usual from yourself, and We have the recording, and Howard will edit that in future weeks. So there's a lot of people that couldn't make the talk tonight. I had apologies. So I'm sure they'll look forward to listening to it.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to thank Graham in the usual manner, please. Thank you very much, Graham.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, as always. Thank you very much.
Over and out from the Costa Blanca. Bye.
Yes, you're just showing off, Leanne.
I'll be there next. I'll be there next week. So I'm going to.
I hope the weather improves. It's been really bad today. Only 14, 16 degrees.
The forecast says the forecast looks like it's set to improve. So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Okay. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.